Let me craft an engaging narrative for part one in a natural, conversational style that draws readers in while staying within appropriate bounds. It was a bright spring morning in suburban Atlanta when Joy Anderson rushed around her kitchen, preparing breakfast for her daughter Lily. At 8 years old, Lily was already showing signs of following in her mother's footsteps, determined, disciplined, and sharp as a tack. Though few in their neighborhood knew it, Joy worked as an undercover FBI agent, a fact she kept quiet to maintain her effectiveness and, more importantly, to give her daughter a normal childhood. Their modern two-story home sat in a peaceful, tree-lined community where neighbors waved to each other during morning walks and children rode their bikes freely on weekends. Lily had her own special corner in the living room, where her piano books were neatly stacked next to a small desk, a testament to her growing passion for music. "Mom, do you think Ms. Chen will like my new piece?" Lily asked, carefully putting her sheet music into her backpack. She'd been practicing Beethoven's For Elise for weeks, determined to master every note. Joy smiled, watching her daughter's careful movements. "Honey, you've practiced so hard. I'm sure she'll be impressed." She placed a plate of whole wheat toast and scrambled eggs in front of Lily, who was already dressed in her navy blue school uniform, her curly hair neatly braided into 2 rows. The community center where Lily took her piano lessons was just a 15-minute walk from their house. It was a route they'd walked together countless times, passing the baker's house with its always booming garden, the old oak tree where neighborhood kids had built a rickety treehouse, and the small park where elderly couples played chess in the afternoons. As an FBI agent, Joy had trained Lily well in safety awareness without making her fearful. They had a routine. Lily would text when she reached the community center and again when she started her walk home. It was their way of staying connected while allowing Lily the independence she was ready for. That morning, as Joy headed to work, she couldn't have known that their peaceful suburban life was about to be disrupted. She kissed Lily goodbye, straightened her daughter's collar one last time, and watched her walk down the driveway with the confidence of a child who felt secure in her world. At work, Joy was respected among her colleagues for her sharp instincts and dedication to justice. Her desk held just 2 personal items: a small potted succulent and a framed photo of Lily at her first piano recital, her gap-toothed smile beaming with pride. The rest of her space was meticulously organized with case files and reports, reflecting her professional approach to everything she did. Throughout the morning, Joy focused on her current case, occasionally glancing at her phone for Lily's usual messages. She received the first one right on schedule. At piano. "Ms. Chen says hi." Joy smiled, typing back a quick heart emoji before returning to her work. She had no way of knowing that in just a few hours, her worlds, professional and personal, would collide in a way she never expected. The morning ticked by peacefully, with the usual sounds of keyboards clicking and quiet conversations about ongoing cases filling the office. Joy's colleagues knew her as a dedicated agent and a devoted single mother, though few knew the daily balancing act she performed to excel in both roles. She had worked hard to create this life for herself and Lily, choosing this particular suburb for its excellent schools and safe streets. Little did anyone know that this ordinary spring day would soon test everything Joy stood for. As a mother, as an FBI agent, and as a citizen fighting for justice in her own quiet way. The peaceful morning was just the calm before a storm that would shake their community to its core and forced long overdue changes in local law enforcement. Would you like me to continue with part 2 of the story? The afternoon sun was high in the sky as Lily stepped out of her piano lesson, sheet music tucked neatly in her backpack. She'd just mastered a particularly tricky part of For Elise, and Miss Chen had given her a golden star sticker for her efforts. The warm spring breeze ruffled her uniform skirt as she started her familiar walk home, her mind still playing the melody she'd practiced. She passed Mr. Wilson's house first, where the old man was tending to his prized roses. He waved as always, and Lily waved back, the way her mom had taught her. friendly but focused on her path. The neighborhood was quiet at this hour, with most people still at work or school. The only sounds were birds chirping and the distant hum of a lawnmower. As Lily turned onto Maple Street, she noticed a police car slowly cruising along the road. At first, she didn't think much of it. Her mom had always taught her that police officers were there to help. But something felt different this time. The car slowed down even more as it approached her, and then the officer inside flashed his lights. Officer Daniel Thompson had been with the local police force for 12 years. He pulled his patrol car to a stop and stepped out, his boots hitting the pavement with heavy thuds. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" His voice boomed across the quiet street, making Lily freeze in her tracks. Her heart started racing as the officer approached. She could feel her hands getting sweaty around the straps of her backpack. "Where are you coming from?" he demanded, his tone harsh and accusatory. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Lily's voice trembled slightly as she answered, "I'm walking home from my piano lesson, sir. I live just 3 blocks away on Oak Drive." She tried to remember everything her mom had taught her about staying calm and respectful. But Officer Thompson wasn't listening. His face twisted into a skeptical scowl as he looked her up and down. "Right," he said, drawing out the word. "And I suppose you just happen to live in one of these $500,000 homes." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "Yes, sir," Lily replied, her voice getting smaller. "My mom and I—" "Sit down on the curb," he cut her off, pointing to the edge of the sidewalk. "I'm going to need to verify your story." He reached for his radio, calling for backup as if he'd caught a dangerous criminal instead of an 8-year-old girl walking home from piano practice. Mrs. Henderson, who lived in the blue house on the corner, was watering her flowers when she saw what was happening. She recognized Lily immediately, the little girl who often smiled and complimented her garden. Seeing the child sitting on the curb, looking scared and confused, Mrs. Henderson quietly pulled out her phone. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived, their lights flashing unnecessarily in the quiet neighborhood. Lily sat perfectly still, her small hands folded in her lap, trying to hold back tears. She could hear the officers talking among themselves, their voices low but their tone dismissive. "Found her wandering around," Officer Thompson was saying to his colleagues. "Claims she lives here, but you know how it is." The other officers nodded, nobody bothering to simply ask Lily for her address or call her mother. The situation was drawing attention now. Neighbors were peeking through their windows or stepping onto their porches. Mrs. Henderson had disappeared inside her house, but not before making an important phone call. What Officer Thompson didn't know was that his actions that afternoon were about to catch up with him in a way he never expected. The spring breeze had turned cool, and Lily shivered slightly in her uniform. She thought about her mom, wishing she could somehow let her know what was happening. Little did she know, help was already on the way, and this incident would soon lead to changes nobody in the quiet suburban neighborhood could have anticipated. Would you like me to continue with part 3 of the story? Officer Thompson stood towering over Lily, who remained seated on the curb, her piano books clutched tightly to her chest. The afternoon shadows were growing longer, and the whole scene felt like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered at a distance, their worried whispers carried by the spring breeze. "So, you expect me to believe that a child like you lives in one of these houses?" Officer Thompson's voice was filled with disbelief. He gestured broadly at the well-maintained homes lining the street. "This is one of the most expensive neighborhoods in town. Maybe you're confused about where you really live." Lily tried again, her voice steadier than she felt. "Sir, I live at 1242 Oak Drive with my mom. We've been here for 3 years. You can call her." "Quiet," Officer Thompson snapped, cutting her off. "I've dealt with this kind of thing before. People thinking they can just wander through nice neighborhoods like they own the place." He turned to one of the other officers who had arrived as backup. Run a check on any reported break-ins in the area. Mrs. Henderson, who had been watching from her porch, couldn't stand it anymore. She stepped forward, her gardening gloves still in her hands. "Officer, I know this child. She lives just." "Ma'am, please step back," Officer Thompson interrupted. "This is a police matter." His dismissive tone made several neighbors shake their heads in disapproval. What nobody noticed was Mr. Chen, the retired photographer from across the street, quietly recording everything on his phone. He had seen too many similar incidents in his lifetime to stay silent now. His hands were steady as he documented every word, every gesture, every abuse of power. The situation was getting more tense by the minute. Officer Thompson had started writing in his notebook, deliberately taking his time while Lily sat there, exposed to everyone's stares. The other officers stood around awkwardly, some beginning to look uncomfortable with the situation. "Maybe we should just escort her home," one of the younger officers suggested quietly. "If she's telling the truth." "If?" came a sharp voice from behind them. The crowd parted, and there stood Joy Anderson, her FBI badge hidden, but her presence commanding immediate attention. She had received Mrs. Henderson's call and arrived as quickly as she could while maintaining her composure. "That's my daughter you have sitting on the curb," Joy said, her voice controlled but fierce. She walked toward Lily, her heels clicking purposefully on the pavement. "Would someone like to explain why she's being treated like a criminal?" Officer Thompson straightened up, his demeanor shifting slightly but his arrogance still evident. "Ma'am, we're conducting an investigation. This girl was found wandering. Walking home from piano lessons," Joy corrected him. "Something she does every Tuesday and Thursday in broad daylight, wearing her school uniform, carrying her piano books." The other officers began to step back, sensing the shift in power. Officer Thompson, however, wasn't ready to back down. "We have protocols to follow. You understand, in a neighborhood like this." "In a neighborhood like what, Officer Thompson?" Joy asked, her eyes locked on his name badge. "Please, finish that thought. I'm very interested in hearing exactly what you mean." The silence that followed was deafening. Neighbors watched, phones recording, as Officer Thompson struggled to find words that wouldn't incriminate him further. Joy stood protectively near Lily, but didn't reveal her FBI credentials yet. She wanted to see exactly how far this would go. "Mom," Lily said softly, beginning to stand up. "Stay seated, young lady." Officer Thompson barked, causing several neighbors to gasp. Joy's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Do not speak to my daughter that way. In fact, don't speak to her at all. From this moment forward, you'll deal directly with me." She pulled out her phone and started recording. "Now, Officer Thompson, please explain to me why you stopped an 8-year-old child in her own neighborhood." The confrontation was about to take a turn that would shake the entire police department to its core, though Officer Thompson didn't know it yet. He was about to learn a valuable lesson about power, prejudice, and the consequences of assumptions. Would you like me to continue with part 4 of the story? The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as Joy stood facing Officer Thompson, her phone steadily recording every moment. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the suburban street, where neighbors continued to gather, their own phones raised to capture the unfolding scene. "I'm waiting for your explanation, Officer Thompson," Joy said, her voice steady but filled with controlled anger. "Why exactly did you feel the need to stop my daughter?" She kept her FBI credentials hidden for now, wanting to document how the officer would treat an ordinary citizen questioning his authority. Officer Thompson shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable but still clinging to his authority. "Ma'am, we received reports of suspicious activity in the neighborhood." This was a lie, and everyone knew it. No such reports had been filed. "Suspicious activity," Joy repeated, her eyebrow raised. "You mean a child walking home from piano lessons, in her school uniform, carrying sheet music?" With each question, Her voice grew more pointed, highlighting the absurdity of the situation. The younger officers in the background were now visibly uncomfortable, some looking at their shoes, others exchanging worried glances. One of them whispered something into his radio, perhaps sensing that this situation was spiraling beyond their control. "Mom," Lily said softly, still sitting on the curb where she'd been ordered to stay. "Can I stand up now?" Before Joy could answer, Officer Thompson barked, "I didn't give permission." "Permission?" Joy cut him off, her patience finally snapping. "You need to understand something, Officer Thompson. You have no authority to keep my daughter sitting on this curb. She has done nothing wrong, and you know it." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward again, this time more boldly. "I saw the whole thing," she announced. "He stopped her for no reason at all. I've lived here for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Mr. Chen, still recording, added his voice. "I have all of it on video, from the moment he made her sit down." Officer Thompson's face reddened. "This is police business. Everyone needs to step back and—" "No," Joy said firmly. "This stopped being just police business the moment you decided to harass an innocent child. Lily, sweetheart, you can stand up now." Lily slowly rose, brushing off her uniform skirt. She walked to her mother's side, standing tall despite the trembling in her hands. The contrast between the small girl in her neat school uniform and the imposing officer who had intimidated her was striking. "Officer Thompson," Joy continued, her phone still recording, "I want your badge number, your supervisor's name, and a copy of the incident report you're going to file about this stop. And believe me, you will be filing a report." The officer's demeanor changed slightly, perhaps finally realizing he'd made a serious mistake. "Look, ma'am, if there's been a misunderstanding—" "A misunderstanding?" Joy's laugh was cold. "No, this is not a misunderstanding. This is a clear abuse of power. How many other children have you stopped like this? How many other families have you harassed?" The crowd of neighbors had grown larger, and murmurs of agreement could be heard. Someone mentioned similar incidents from the past few months. Another neighbor talked about their own uncomfortable encounters with Officer Thompson. Joy pulled out her business card, not her FBI credentials yet, and handed it to Officer Thompson. "You'll be hearing from me officially very soon, and I suggest you start preparing your explanation for why you thought it was appropriate to treat an 8-year-old this way." As she spoke these words, a more senior police officer's car pulled up to the scene. The neighbors watched as the older officer stepped out, taking in the scene with concern. He'd clearly been called by one of the younger officers who recognized that the situation had gotten out of hand. What Officer Thompson didn't realize was that this was just the beginning. Joy had already set a plan in motion that would expose not just this incident, but a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for far too long. The real revelation was still to come. Would you like me to continue with part 5 of the story? The next morning, Joy sat at her FBI office, her fingers moving swiftly across her keyboard. Her desk, usually neat and organized, was now covered with files and documents. She had spent the entire night gathering information, and what she found was disturbing. Officer Thompson's record revealed a pattern that couldn't be ignored. "You're not going to believe this," she said to her colleague, Officer Chen, who had been helping her dig through police records. "In the past year alone, there have been 15 similar incidents. All of them involving minorities, all of them swept under the rug." The office hummed with quiet energy as other agents began taking notice of Joy's investigation. Her supervisor, Director Reynolds, approached her desk with a concerned look. "I heard about what happened yesterday," he said quietly. "How's your daughter doing?" Joy paused her typing, thinking about how Lily had trouble sleeping last night. "She's shaken, but she's strong. What bothers me more is thinking about all the other children who didn't have someone to stand up for them." Director Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "We've been hearing rumors about problems in that police department. This might be the case that finally breaks it open. He placed a supportive hand on her desk. You have the Bureau's full backing on this. As Joy dug deeper, more disturbing details emerged. Complaint forms that had mysteriously disappeared. Witness statements that were never filed. Body camera footage that conveniently went missing during similar incidents. Mrs. Henderson had already emailed her the video she took, along with a detailed statement. Mr. Chen's footage arrived next, showing the entire incident from a different angle. Other neighbors began sending in their own accounts of past incidents they'd witnessed or experienced. By lunchtime, Joy's email was flooded with messages from community members. One particularly touching email came from a teacher at the local middle school. Officer Thompson has a habit of parking near our school, she wrote. Some of our students are now afraid to walk home. Joy printed out the most important documents, creating a timeline of events. She pinned them to her office board, connecting the dots with red string. Each incident, when viewed alone, might have been dismissed as a misunderstanding. But together, they painted a clear picture of systematic harassment. Look at this, Officer Chen called out, pointing to his computer screen. Thompson was transferred from 3 different precincts before landing here, each time after complaints started piling up. Joy felt her blood boil, but kept her professional composure. She remembered Lily's face yesterday, sitting on that curb, and all the other children who must have felt the same fear and humiliation. The office printer hummed as it spat out page after page of evidence. Joy organized everything meticulously. She knew this had to be handled perfectly. One mistake, one procedural error, and Thompson might slip through the cracks again. We need to bring this to Internal Affairs, Director Reynolds said, reviewing the files. But we need to do it right. This isn't just about one incident anymore. This is about changing an entire system that allowed this to happen. Joy nodded, thinking about how to proceed. She knew that tomorrow's meeting with the police department would be crucial. They wouldn't expect an FBI agent to walk in, especially not one whose child had been directly affected. As the afternoon sun streamed through her office window, Joy received one more email. It was from another parent in the neighborhood, attached with security camera footage from 6 months ago. I was too afraid to come forward before, the message read. But after seeing you stand up to him yesterday, I can't stay silent anymore. Joy leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. Tomorrow would be a turning point, not just for Officer Thompson, but for the entire community. She looked at the photo of Lily on her desk, smiling at her last piano recital, and knew that this fight was about more than just one incident. It was about making sure no child would ever have to feel afraid in their own neighborhood again. Would you like me to continue with part 6 of the story? The police station's conference room was unusually quiet that morning. Police Chief Richards sat at the head of the table, surrounded by internal affairs investigators and senior officers. They were reviewing Joy's carefully prepared presentation, their faces growing more serious with each page. This is troubling, Chief Richards said, his voice heavy with concern. He looked up at Joy, who stood confidently at the other end of the table. And you say this has been going on for how long? 3 years, at least, Joy replied, clicking to the next slide. And those are just the incidents we could document. We believe there are many more that went unreported. She hadn't revealed her FBI credentials yet, letting the evidence speak for itself first. The room grew tenser as security camera footage played on the screen. One video after another showed Officer Thompson's pattern of behavior, each incident following a similar pattern to what happened with Lily. Last month, a 12-year-old boy walking his dog, Joy narrated. 2 months before that, a teenage girl coming home from track practice. 3 months ago, a group of children playing basketball in their own driveway. She paused, letting the weight of each incident sink in. Captain Martinez from Internal Affairs leaned forward, his forehead creased with worry. Why hasn't this been brought to our attention before? Joy clicked to another slide, showing a stack of dismissed complaints. They were brought to your attention multiple times. But somehow, these complaints kept getting buried or marked as resolved without investigation. The door opened, and Officer Thompson walked in, looking confident until he saw Joy. His face paled slightly as he recognized her from yesterday. He was even more surprised to see Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Chen sitting quietly in the corner, along with several other community members who had come forward. "Officer Thompson," Chief Richards said, his voice stern. "Please take a seat." Joy waited until Thompson sat down before delivering her next blow. She pulled out her FBI badge and placed it on the table. The room fell completely silent. "I'm Special Agent Joy Anderson," she announced. "And yesterday, your officer didn't just harass any child. He harassed the daughter of an FBI agent who specializes in civil rights violations." Officer Thompson's confident facade crumbled. He looked desperately at his superiors, but found no support in their faces. "We've reviewed Officer Thompson's body camera footage from yesterday," Joy continued, "but interestingly, there are gaps in the recording. Just like there are gaps in his recordings from these other incidents." She gestured to the screen, where a timeline showed multiple instances of conveniently missing footage. Mrs. Henderson stood up, her voice steady. "I've lived in this community for 20 years. What I saw yesterday wasn't just wrong. It was part of a pattern that's been poisoning our neighborhood for far too long." Chief Richards raised his hand to stop any interruptions. "Agent Anderson, what exactly are you proposing?" Joy pulled out a thick folder. "This isn't just about firing one officer. This is about fixing a system that allowed this behavior to continue unchecked. I have here a detailed proposal for department-wide reforms, including enhanced training, community oversight, and a complete overhaul of your complaint investigation procedures." The room buzzed with whispered conversations. Officer Thompson sat silent, realizing that his career was unraveling before his eyes. The evidence was too strong, the witnesses too credible, and the FBI's involvement too serious to ignore. "There's one more thing," Joy added, her voice carrying across the room. "My daughter isn't just any victim in this case. She's a witness who's brave enough to speak up, and she represents every child who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong in their own neighborhood." The morning sun streamed through the conference room windows, casting long shadows across the table covered in evidence of years of misconduct. Change was coming to this department, and it was starting today. Would you like me to continue with part 7 of the story? The days following the police department meeting brought waves of change through the community. As news spread about the investigation, more people stepped forward with their stories. The local community center, where Lily took her piano lessons, became an unofficial gathering place for families sharing similar experiences. Joy sat in Chief Richards' office, watching as he signed the new department reform policies. The thick stack of papers represented months of work condensed into a few days of intense action. The chief looked tired but determined. "I failed this community," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have seen the signs sooner." He paused, looking at a photo of his own grandchildren on his desk. No child should ever feel unsafe in their own neighborhood. Meanwhile, Officer Thompson faced a disciplinary board. The room was packed with senior officers, community representatives, and police oversight committee members. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by nervous glances and fidgeting hands. "Your record shows 17 documented incidents," the board chairman stated. "And those are just the ones we know about. How do you explain this pattern of behavior, Officer Thompson?" Thompson struggled to find words. "I was just following protocol, maintaining neighborhood security." His excuses sounded hollow even to his own ears. Back at the FBI office, Joy's colleagues had uncovered even more. "Look at this," Officer Chen said, pointing to his computer screen. Similar complaints in his previous districts. They just kept moving him around instead of addressing the problem. The evidence was overwhelming. Personnel files, witness statements, surveillance footage, and community complaints painted a clear picture of systematic harassment spanning years. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of Thompson's career. At home, Lily was slowly regaining her confidence. She still walked to her piano lessons, but now neighbors made a point of being outside during those times. Mrs. Henderson would be watering her flowers, Mr. Chen would be checking his mail, and other families would be out walking their dogs. The community really came together, Joy thought as she watched from their front porch one afternoon. She saw kids of all backgrounds playing together in the street, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. This was how it should have been all along. The police department was undergoing major changes. New training programs were implemented, focusing on community relations and bias awareness. Every officer was required to attend workshops led by community members, hearing firsthand about the impact of their actions. It's not just about punishing one bad officer, Chief Richards explained during a community meeting. It's about changing the culture that allowed this to happen. The room was filled with nodding heads and supportive murmurs. Local news stations picked up the story, careful to protect the identities of the minors involved. Headlines focused on the positive changes. Police department implements historic reforms, and community leads way in law enforcement change. Joy's FBI team continued monitoring the situation. They set up a special hotline for reporting similar incidents, ensuring that no complaint would go unheard again. The response was overwhelming, not just from their community, but from neighboring districts as well. One morning, as Joy drove Lily to school, they passed Officer Thompson's old patrol area. A new officer was there now, chatting warmly with a group of children waiting for their school bus. The officer waved at passing cars, his friendly smile genuine. "Mom," Lily said, watching the scene, "do you think things will stay different now?" Joy glanced at her daughter, seeing wisdom beyond her years in those young eyes. "Change takes work, sweetie. But when people stand together and speak up, real change is possible." The morning sun painted the neighborhood in warm light, highlighting a community transformed not just by the removal of one officer, but by the courage of its members to stand up and demand better. Would you like me to continue with Part 8 of the story? The police department's main conference room buzzed with activity as Chief Richards stood before a packed audience. Local news cameras rolled, capturing what would become a historic moment for the community. The results of the investigation were finally being made public. After a thorough review, Chief Richards announced, his voice firm and clear, "Officer Thompson's employment with our department has been terminated, effective immediately." The room erupted in murmurs, but he wasn't finished. "More importantly, we're implementing sweeping changes to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." Joyce sat in the back of the room, watching as months of hard work came to fruition. Next to her, other parents nodded in approval, some wiping away quiet tears. These were the families who had been afraid to speak up before, who had finally found their voices. The chief continued, outlining the new policies: mandatory body cameras that couldn't be turned off during stops, community oversight committees, regular bias training, and a new complaint system that ensured transparency. Each announcement was met with approving nods from the audience. In the front row, Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I've lived here 40 years, she whispered to the person next to her. "Never thought I'd see a day like this." The presentation shifted to statistics, numbers that told a story of systematic problems that had gone unchecked for too long. But now, those same numbers would be used to measure progress and hold officers accountable. "We're not just changing policies," the chief explained. "We're changing our entire approach to community policing. Every officer will be required to spend time getting to know the neighborhoods they serve, not just patrolling them, but becoming part of them." As if to demonstrate this new approach, the department introduced Officer Rodriguez, who would be taking over Thompson's former patrol area. She stood up, smiling warmly at the crowd. "I became a police officer to protect and serve everyone," she said. "Not just some people, everyone." The meeting shifted to a question and answer session. Community members stood up one by one, sharing their hopes and concerns. Each question was answered with patience and respect, a marked difference from the dismissive attitudes of the past. Back at home that evening, Joy watched Lily practicing her piano. The music floated through their house, peaceful and uninterrupted. No more nervous glances out the window, no more fear about walking to lessons. Their doorbell rang, and Joy opened it to find Mrs. Henderson holding a cake. "For our neighborhood hero," she said with a warm smile. "Both of you." Behind her stood several other neighbors, each carrying dishes for an impromptu celebration. The gathering grew as more people arrived. Children played in the backyard while adults talked on the patio. Officer Rodriguez stopped by briefly, chatting easily with everyone and accepting a piece of cake. This was community policing in action. Natural, respectful, human. Mr. Chen showed up with his camera, but this time he was taking photos of happy moments. Kids playing, neighbors laughing, a community healing. For the neighborhood newsletter, he explained, but everyone knew it was about more than that. It was about documenting what positive change looked like. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Joy's backyard, she watched her daughter playing with other children. They were carefree, exactly as children should be. The sound of their laughter mixed with the adults' conversations, creating a symphony of community. Someone suggested making this a monthly gathering, a community dinner where everyone could stay connected and keep the lines of communication open. The idea was met with enthusiasm and quickly turned into planning. Chief Richard's words from the meeting echoed in Joy's mind. Change isn't just about removing what's wrong. It's about building something better in its place. Looking around at her neighbors, at the natural mixing of people from all backgrounds, Joy knew that something better was already taking root. Would you like me to continue with the final part 9, of the story? 6 months had passed since that spring afternoon that changed everything. The neighborhood had transformed in ways both big and small. On this bright autumn morning, Joy stood at her kitchen window, watching kids of all backgrounds walking to school together, their backpacks bouncing as they chatted and laughed. The local newspaper sat on her counter, its headline reading, "Police Department's new community program becomes national model." Joy smiled, remembering how much work had gone into making these changes real and lasting. Lily's piano practice now filled their home every afternoon, the music floating freely through open windows. No more worried texts, no more nervous glances. Instead, neighbors would often stop to listen, sometimes leaving little notes of encouragement in their mailbox. "Mom, look what Officer Rodriguez gave us," Lily called out, running in from the front yard. She held up a flyer for the first ever community safety fair, organized jointly by the police department and neighborhood council. Joy's heart warmed seeing her daughter's excitement about a police event, something that would have been unthinkable half a year ago. At the FBI office, Joy's work had taken on new meaning. Her team had developed a training program based on their community's experience, and police departments across the country were asking to learn more. "Your daughter's incident sparked a national conversation," Director Reynolds told her proudly. The community center, once just a place for piano lessons, had become a hub for positive change. Weekly meetings brought together residents and police officers for open discussions. Children's artwork decorated the walls, including a large mural that read, "Our community, our future." Mrs. Henderson had turned her front garden into a gathering spot, adding benches where people could sit and chat. "My flowers have never bloomed better," she would say. "They must love all the happy voices." Officer Thompson's story had become a cautionary tale in police training sessions nationwide. Not as a story of one bad officer, but as a lesson about the importance of community trust and the courage to speak up when something is wrong. At the monthly community dinner, now a beloved tradition, Joy watched as Officer Rodriguez played basketball with local kids while their parents prepared food. The officer's badge caught the sunlight, But it wasn't a symbol of fear anymore. It had become a sign of protection and respect. Chief Richards, who had initially seemed overwhelmed by the changes, now spoke at national conferences about their success story. It's not about perfect policies, he would say. It's about perfect intentions and constant effort. The neighborhood newsletter, edited by Mr. Chen, featured stories of community members making a difference. This month's cover showed Lily performing at a charity concert she had organized to raise money for youth programs at the community center. As Joy helped set up for the evening's community dinner, she overheard two new families talking. "We chose this neighborhood because we heard about how everyone looks out for each other here," one parent said. "It feels like home already." The sun was setting, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink. Families began arriving for dinner, carrying dishes and stories to share. The aroma of different cuisines filled the air, a testament to their community's rich diversity. Lily sat at the piano in the community center, playing a new piece she had learned. Joy watched as her daughter's fingers moved confidently across the keys, no longer haunted by that spring afternoon. The music spoke of hope, of change, of a community that had found its voice. Sometimes, Joy thought, watching the scene unfold, the biggest changes start with the smallest moments. A child walking home from piano practice, a mother standing up for what's right, neighbors coming together. These simple actions had created waves of change that would ripple out for years to come. As the community gathered for dinner, their laughter and conversation echoing through the evening air, Joy knew that they had built something precious, a place where every child could walk safely, where every voice mattered, and where justice wasn't just a word, but a living, breathing reality. The end. Would you like me to help you with anything else about the story?